Good morning. It's good to be with you all again this morning. Good to see you. I hope you had as good a week as I did. It was busy, but it was a good week. So I hope you had a good week, and I hope you're having a strong start to this week. One of the things I appreciate about this time together is I get to spend moments during my week preparing for these lessons. So I always appreciate that. Appreciate the focused Bible study time. But I'm afraid this morning we're going to have a really crummy lesson. Now you'll see why I say that by the end here, I hope. But it's going to be a really crummy lesson. If you remember back to last week, we saw Jesus having some harder conversations with people. The crowds have sought him out, and he says, "You're just seeking me because you ate the bread. You got fed." Right? And so he launches into this discourse on, "I am the bread of life," and how this bread is his body that's going to be sacrificed, right? And he tells the crowd to eat my body and drink my blood, and this is eternal life, and this sort of language that really turns off most of the crowd. Many of his disciples from that time stopped following him. We also saw briefly, I wish we could have spent a little more time on it, but we're always limited. We see some Pharisees and scribes that have come from Jerusalem, seemingly for the sole purpose of harassing Jesus, but they attack his disciples and say, why are they violating the tradition of the elders by eating with unwashed hands? And sure, while washing your hands before you eat is good advice, it wasn't necessarily against the law in the sense they're doing it. And Jesus turns this around on the Pharisees and say, why do you invalidate the law of God by following all these traditions and building up these things that God has not bound, right? So last week we didn't see Jesus making a lot of friends here. He wasn't performing the miracles. He wasn't doing many of the things, even though they demanded a miracle. Show us a sign, as they so often do. He wasn't doing that. And so we see, again, the opposition to Jesus continues to ramp up. At this point in the life of Christ and his ministry, it's late. This is kind of the events this morning take place late spring into the summer, before he will be crucified, because we know it's between the Passovers, but it's still before the John. Oh, okay, okay. No, that's fine. But it's before the Feast of Tabernacles that we'll see in a week or two here, which would have been like mid-October of that year. So it's between the Passover in April and October in the year before Jesus will be crucified. So things are getting a little more heated, and Jesus leaves the country for a little while. This morning he'll go up into the region of Tyre and Sidon. This is probably the first time, at least this is the first time we have recorded, that Jesus leaves the country, aside from, as a small child, the family fleeing to Egypt to escape Herod the First. But aside from that, we see Jesus, in the region of Israel. Now, Tyre and Sidon were still in the old region of Israel, that part of the promised land that was to be conquered. But of course, we know and we'll see this morning that conquering was never complete. The people under Joshua and in subsequent generations never completely, essentially exterminated the people as they were commanded to. And when he arrives in this region of Tyre and Sidon, he's trying to go unnoticed. He's not trying to make a big to-do of this. As I said, he's kind of thinned the crowds a little bit from last week. He's opposing the Pharisees and speaking against them, and so he's kind of quelled that a little bit, kind of quenched it, and now he's gone out of the country to escape some of that as well. Remember, Herod Antipas is also seeking Jesus at this time. Well, he's gone out of the country, and this is a region populated by Gentiles and even Canaanites, as we'll see this morning in Matthew chapter 15 and Mark chapter 7. And we didn't quite get to it, but Jesus has recently told his disciples after kind of wrestling with the Pharisees a little bit. He says, "Do you not understand that whatever goes into the man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not go into his heart, but into his stomach and is eliminated," right? That clean and unclean foods, right? And then Mark inserts sort of this parenthetical saying, "Thus he declared all foods clean." So Jesus is already sort of, breaking down their understanding of these clean and unclean, and then he goes out of the country into a almost completely Gentile area, right? I think he's sort of challenging them about, reaching out to other people, to non-Jews, even though Jesus keeps it very, very close at this time. So I think to some extent he may be challenging the disciples' views of the different races, the different ethnicities, and he works among them, as we'll see this morning. Well, a woman comes to Jesus and his disciples. He's trying not to be noticed, but Mark says he could not be hidden, right? His celebrity, if you will, has spread even beyond the confines of Israel and the Jews. And a woman comes, a Syrophoenician woman, a Canaanite woman, right? As I said, the extermination of the people in the Promised Land was never complete, and so she is a descendant of those people. And she says, "Have mercy on me, son of David." Right? She uses this messianic term of the Jewish Messiah, and yet she's a Canaanite Gentile. Right? So she has some understanding, right, or at least some hope that Jesus is not just for the Jews, right? Which, of course, is a mind-blowing concept to all of the Jews, right, who struggle with this, even Jesus' closest disciples. Well, I think if I had one word to sum up this woman, it would be persistence, because she's kind of hounding them, right? She's kind of causing a bit of a commotion here. As I said, Jesus is trying to go unnoticed. He needs some time with his disciples, away from the crowds, and yet she keeps crying out, crying out. She seems to be following them. Why initially would Jesus ignore this woman? She needs help. She's got a daughter who is demon-possessed. Jesus has cast out many demons from many people before, right? So she knows perhaps that he can do this. Why would Jesus ignore her? At first, he doesn't respond. Okay, he's testing her. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we'll see that he is testing her. Linwood? Okay, yeah. Yeah, exactly. He says, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of Israel. Right? That's what he says initially. Greg? Okay. Sorry, this thing's about to fly off when I nod. Yeah, I think it is a lesson to the disciples that she's another race, she's another ethnicity, she comes from another background in her faith, probably given her heritage here, and yet he will still minister to her. Right? Jesus is not just for the Jews. But then here he says, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of Israel. Why would Jesus say that? I mean, we know the gospel is for all people everywhere. And later he'll say things like that, right? Go into all the world. Or you can be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Samaria and to all the world. So why does he say, I've only been sent to the lost sheep of Israel? Okay, well, certainly they had a messianic expectation, right? They're looking for the Christ. Yeah, absolutely. I think, Jesus also goes on to say, let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. I mean, that seems, on a surface reading, that seems kind of out of character for Jesus, doesn't it? Like, wow, was he having a bad day? It seems like a harsh term, right? Yeah. Yeah, I think absolutely there's a little wordplay here. The Jews often referred to the Gentiles, and probably the Canaanites in particular, not just Gentiles, but people they had a little, combative history with, let's say. And they would refer to them as dogs, in a very derogatory sort of way. And so, this would not have been, the Jews would have been familiar with this dog language, but Jesus chooses a particular word. He has two main vocabulary words in the Greek to use here, and he's probably speaking Greek to this woman more than the Aramaic, actually. One is this kion, and kion is used to, and don't quote me on the pronunciation or anything like that, but this term is used to refer to a mongrel dog, a street dog, right? An opportunistic scavenger that, kind of lives on trash or hunts down things. In a lot of areas of the world, dogs are not seen very positively, right? They carry rabies. They're considered dirty and impure. And God Himself uses this term elsewhere in Scripture. Beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of the mutilation. In Philippians 3:2, and mutilation being the Judaizers who were trying to enforce circumcision. So not a good list for dogs to be associated with. In Revelation 22, but outside are dogs and sorcerers and sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters, and it goes on. So this first term, kion, is not the term that Jesus uses. That term was used by the Jews in a derogatory sense. But here Jesus chooses kind of the other main term for a dog, kanarion, which is a much more soft term, right? This is like a beloved family pet, like a puppy, right? Someone you have affection for. So when Jesus uses this term dog, don't think of dirty dog. It's more of a beloved pet, someone you care for, you have affection for, and you have this master and pet relationship with. Also, Jesus knows it's not yet time, right? Jesus has a particular mission. As he says, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of Israel. So he's got a scope of what he's doing. He has very limited time, particularly at this moment, just months to go in his earthly ministry. He's got some things he needs to accomplish, right, that God's given him to do. And sure, the gospel will go out to the rest of the world, but it's not yet the right time for Jesus to just, start doing the same kind of ministry all over the Gentile world as he's doing with the Jews. Phil? Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how... Right. Yeah, it seems kind of offensive at first. Yeah. Yeah. And Jesus' reluctance, it's really the disciples that say, Jesus, she's harassing us, send her away. And Jesus finally responds. And the situation reminds me of the wedding at Cana. If you remember way back now when we discussed that. Jesus' mother comes to him and says, they have no wine. And Jesus says, well, what does that have to do with me? But then he does it anyway, right? He says, my hour has not yet come. So he's not ready. He hasn't like gotten the signal from the Father in some way that, hey, you need to start your public ministry. We need to start doing certain things. So again, Jesus is trying to keep it himself kind of concealed during this time. Mark? Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah, there's a right order to things in God's plan, right? As you say, he's been prepping his people, his chosen people, the Jews, thousands of years now, right? Been working with them, preparing them for the Messiah and that expectation. And there's a time and place for the full spreading of the gospel. And also, Jesus has come here to get away from the crowds. And, if you just start doing miracles willy-nilly, then the crowds are going to start to reform, right? He wants some private time with his disciples to teach them as well. So, certainly the gospel is for the whole world. It's for the Gentile world. None of us would be here. I don't know if we have any Jewish people in the congregation. I don't know. But most of us, the vast majority of the church worldwide, would not be in the church, right? If Jesus had not, extended his gospel to the whole world. Well, this woman gives what I call a really crummy answer. And you see the wordplay, of course. This is kind of a thing in my house because my youngest son, Matthew, when he was about 2, my wife baked him some cookies, and he has a peanut allergy, so you have to be careful of the chocolate that's used, etc. So he was eating the cookies and making a huge mess all over himself. He's 2. And Mandy asked, well, are the cookies any good? Do you like them? And he says, this is a really crummy cookie. And he was really excited about how many crumbs the cookie was making. And so now we say, oh yeah, this is really crummy. And the woman answers a little strangely too, right? This is kind of an odd conversation. She says, he's just said it's not good to feed the dogs instead of the children first. She says, yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. And Jesus strongly commends this answer. He strongly commends this woman for this. Why is this such a great answer? Okay. Yeah, she's certainly put a lot of thought into what she's doing. She's very determined. I think, being a Canaanite, being from this area, her heritage religiously would have been a very pagan background, and yet she's come to the Jewish Messiah. Right? I think that says a lot about her and her thought process and understanding the things of God. Even in sort of her environment. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think she definitely sees a hierarchy here. Yeah. And yeah, these teachings of Jesus himself is not, he doesn't just go to the high priest, he doesn't just go to the priesthood and the religious leaders, but it's for everyone. Linwood and then John. Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. John. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I think we saw some of that last week, right? The crowd was not, they saw the miracles and still didn't quite put it together. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Norm? Yeah. Right. Yeah. 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 Yeah, absolutely. The inflection of the text, right? The expressions. Yeah. Glenn? Oh. Oh. Hmm. Yep. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't doubt her tenacity either, right? Her persistence. This is personal to her. Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I think it's certainly, yeah, yeah. Sir, did you have, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. They're going to get this done. Yep. Greg? Hmm. Yeah, 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 yep, yeah, absolutely. So, hmm, hmm, interesting. Yeah, yeah, I'll have to look at that. That is interesting. Yeah, it's kind of going back to the hierarchy thing, and the order of things, like going first to the Jews, and then the Jews being able to take that to the world. This woman's response, I think, shows. I think Linwood, you said humility, right? She's acknowledging, yeah, you're the master. She says, yes, Lord, right? But even the crumbs, yes, I'm below you. I come humbly. She's not entitled. She's not self-righteous here, right? She's not saying, I've been such a good person. I know I'm not Jewish, but I haven't murdered anybody. I don't steal. I don't. She could have listed off the things maybe, but she doesn't do that. She just says, she's acknowledging you're the master, and I must take whatever crumbs you deem necessary, right, or you deem appropriate. So yeah, she's not argumentative back. She's very humble. A very like a poor in spirit kind of example. And I think a great example to the disciples and to us today. Phil? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that training for his disciples, right? As he says, look, if you look how Jesus responds, kind of the inflection of the text, I think we get a little flavor of that, right? Because it seems to me Jesus speaks even emotionally here. He says, oh woman, great is your faith, right? Let it be to you as you desire. And her daughter was healed. Um, so Jesus speaks highly of the faith of two people in the Gospels. Does anyone know the other one off the top of their heads? The Roman centurion. Yeah, another non-Jew, right? These are Gentile people. Very interesting. And yet, he says, the disciples are standing around. He's like, this is great faith. This is what I'm talking about, guys. She's persistent. She's humble. She's poor in spirit. She's determined, right? Just like the centurion was. And then it's also interesting this healing takes place at a distance. He doesn't have to go to her house and lay hands on or, do it. She's not asking him to do anything in particular. Just heal her. I don't care the method. You don't have to come. Just do it. Just, will it and it will be done. Seems to be her attitude. As with the Roman centurion, I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof. But you have people, right? There's a hierarchy there. Yeah, absolutely. Well, from here, Jesus, he spends a little time in this area, and he seems to go up and around, kind of skirting the Sea of Galilee a little further north, and comes to the area of the Decapolis. And I'm just going to briefly summarize here. But this is where he feeds the 4,000. This is largely a Gentile audience again. The last time we saw Jesus in the Decapolis, he has cast out the army of demons from the man who went throughout that area. So maybe we do get a little of that, the witness of this person, Greg, there as you speak of. This time he feeds the 4,000, and it's similar to the feeding of the 5,000. It's definitely a different event. There are scholars that say it's the same, but it's not. Jesus refers to both of them at the same time in one place. But on this occasion, I think we see some growth from the disciples. This time they're not saying, oh, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough food, how are we going to do this? They just kind of, salute and execute, and Jesus, multiplies the bread to the Gentiles as well. But the next event I want to focus in on is Jesus goes from there, kind of across the Sea of Galilee. He has some debates with the Pharisees, and then he heads north to Caesarea Philippi. This was a town, dedicated to Caesar by Philip. There was already a Caesarea. There were a whole bunch of Caesareas, actually, sort of ingratiating with the emperor. But, of course, again, Herod Antipas is seeking Jesus, and Jesus is sort of staying out of his reach. He only goes into Galilee for short excursions. Now, Caesarea Philippi, this area, was known historically as a major center of Baal worship. So, all kinds of temples. In Jesus' time, there was a temple to Pan, another pagan god, of course. And you start to see sort of the tendrils of emperor worship, Roman emperor worship. That it wasn't yet, mandated from the top down, as it would be in the late first century, which became a major problem for Christians who could not worship the emperor, of course. But there was at that time a temple there built for Caesar. So you start to see this influence. But on the road there, and perhaps once they arrive, Jesus quizzes his disciples and says, "Who do men say that I am?" Who do they say? What are some of the responses they give? This is Matthew chapter 16, Mark chapter 8. Okay. Yeah. There's Elijah. There's John the Baptist. One reading says Jeremiah. So John the Baptist has been killed, and of course that's kind of the ideology that Herod Antipas has. That maybe this guy is John the Baptizer raised again, right? Kind of come back to haunt me with his guilty conscience. Some say Elijah, right? Because they're expecting Elijah to return. There seems to be even have been sort of an extra biblical expectation for Jeremiah to return, because the Jews were a little, a little upset, I guess, that it sort of felt an incompleteness because Jeremiah's death is not recorded in Scripture, and then they had some extra biblical writings that kind of rounded out his story. But so they're kind of hitting around the truth, right? I mean, Jesus is certainly a prophet. He's certainly sent with a message from God. But then he turns to them and says, "Who do you say that I am?" And of course, Peter again steps up with another of his great confessions. He says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," right? You are the anointed Messiah, the one we've been waiting on. And interestingly, Jesus says, "Blessed are you, because flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, Peter," right? But my Father in heaven. How do you think the Father in heaven has revealed this to Peter? You ever thought about it? How? Well, the problem is we don't know. We don't know exactly what Jesus is referring to. It could be that Peter had some, personal revelation. God, was known to work in those ways, right? But it also could be that Peter has been witness to the ministry of Jesus, right? He's seen the miracles. He's heard the teaching. And these have convinced, of course, these are from God, and these have convinced Peter of this truth, just as they convince us today Lin- Hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, Jesus will later say, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, right? And you can understand I'm the Son, right? The living God. Um. So, this confession, like you're the Messiah, and not just the Messiah, like another prophet or the ultimate prophet, but he's the ultimate prophet, and he's the Son, the very characteristic of the living God, right? It's quite a confession, quite an understanding, at least that he voices. Now, I don't think they fully understood all the impact of that, right? Because after all, Jesus now starts to teach them harder things, right? You know, we've reached the end of Unit 1. Now we're going to Unit 2. We're going to study some more complicated things. Because he starts to tell them, now that you know who I am, you understand that we're going to talk about what I'm going to do. And so Jesus says, I must suffer and be rejected and die. And so as soon as the disciples think, yeah, he's the Christ, he's the Messiah, that entails a lot of things in their minds, right? We're under the jackboot sandals of Rome. So, he's the son of David, right? David was a mighty warrior king. He's going to throw off the the oppression of Rome. He's going to restore glory to Israel. But then he says, I'm going to suffer and be rejected by all the religious leaders, and I'm going to be killed. This is not at all in the expectation of his disciples. So Peter takes Jesus aside. Interestingly, and I think that's appropriate. If you're going to, kind of take your teacher to task, you better do it privately instead of in front of the group, right? And he says, far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you. And Jesus has a powerful reaction to this. How does Jesus respond to Peter on this occasion? Get behind me, Satan. It actually says he turns to his disciples, like he's speaking to Peter in kind of a private conversation that Peter's having with him. And he turns to his disciples, putting Peter to his back and making the conversation more public, right? He says, get behind me, Satan. For you are an offense to me. You are not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of man. Why does Jesus react so strongly? I mean, calling your disciple who's just made this confession Satan is a pretty strong rebuke. Why wouldn't Jesus say, hey, this has got to happen. You guys have to understand, But he reacts so immediately, so strongly. Greg? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he's trying to get very powerfully, and I think in an initial way, right, that this is what I'm doing, right? You are not going to dissuade me from doing this. Because after all, I mean, Jesus, it's great that he came and taught these wonderful things, right, that we could live by. It's amazing that he could do all these miracles and heal people, and, that's all great. It gives you all the warm fuzzies, but it doesn't get you to heaven, right? He has to give his body, right? His body and his blood, as we talked about last week. That sacrifice has to happen, and he's not going to be dissuaded from it. Mark? Yeah. 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 Hmm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, absolutely. The kibosh on this idea, this temptation, because Jesus is fully human. He's fully God as well, but he's fully human in the flesh. Jesus doesn't want to suffer. He doesn't want to be rejected. He doesn't want to be killed. But he wants the results of that, making that ultimate sacrifice, right?
Well, Eric, like we said, the disciples still didn't get it. I mean,
Right.
they had their idea of what he was here for,
Yep.
and it wasn't what he was really here for. I mean,
Yeah.
they still didn't grasp the concept of what he was trying to do.
Yeah, they have completely different thoughts on what this Messiah is going to,
Right, yeah.
to be and do, right, Paul?
In Jeremiah, after he's been prophesying all these bad things, and they seek out other prophets, we don't like the message.
Yeah.
We want a different message, and that's kind of, not exactly, but kind of where the disciples are now. No, that's not what we want.
Right.
Tell us the real story. That's not what we want to hear.
Yeah.
So, and we're the same way. We want the cuddly, glamorous, miraculous Jesus. We don't want the suffering servant.
Yeah.
We don't want the suffering for ourselves. We want the other stuff. So we're no different than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're no different. Terry and then Phil. Yeah. Yeah. He's come this far in his understanding, and now Jesus is giving him some more, and he's not ready to take that yet. Phil?
Then he also says, this is what's going to happen to me, and it
Yeah.
needs to happen to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're going to take up your cross, right, and follow me. You must do this, Jesus says. Yeah. I mean, remember the words of Satan in the wilderness, right? If you are the Son of God, then turn these stones to bread, right? You don't have to be confined to this humanity, right? You don't have to suffer. You don't have to live as a person, right? So that temptation is strong for Jesus, I think. We have to understand, a lot of people think, well, he was the Son of God. He could not have been tempted, but he could be tempted. He was tempted in every way that we are, yet was without sin, right? So he's got to face that. And I think I like that. Put the kibosh on this idea that I'm not going to the cross. I'm not going to suffer. That there's some other way, right? Very interesting. Well, it looks like it's time. I got to dismiss everybody, but read about taking up your cross and following him this week, and think about it. We didn't quite get to that part of our discussion this morning, but I appreciate the comments. Thank you.